Welcome, and I'll just talk faster, right? My talk is about open government systems. Are any of you from a government of any kind? Okay, that's yeah. I think you're really in the right session, even though we started late, because a lot of the other sessions here are really, really technical. I'm not going to be that technical. I'll try to make it a little more fun than technical. The other side is that this is a problem that's on the upswing. So a lot of the things that I saw here today, like, your car has this vulnerability, or you can exploit JavaScript this way. I've done a fair amount of that stuff over the years, but the reality is those problems get solved, and then other problems come along. So when you're down in the kind of technical trenches there, although it's very interesting, it's not the stuff with staying power. I pretty well guarantee you that 10 years from now, somebody, maybe not me, will be standing up here talking to you about open government data and why there are vulnerabilities. Now, first of all, standard disclaimers. I work for the university, but these aren't their views. Some of the things I'm going to show you today, I did the research a few years ago, so they've been patched up. And I do like open data. I don't want to convey in any way that I'm an enemy of open data. I think there's a lot of great things about it. I just want to see it done properly. And I'm not going to read every word on the slide because I know I'm between you and some alcohol, right? What is open data? Well, governments around the world are opening up the data that they used to keep. If you think about it, a government has the right to collect data. I live in Canada. Someone is actually going to jail because she refused to complete the census. On principle, she wouldn't fill out the document, and the government wants to send the woman to jail. So governments can compel you to give data. They can compel you to pay taxes and things like that. And they have all that data. What they're realizing is that if they open it up, some good stuff can happen. So there are hackathons going on where people go and they take all the government data and they figure out new uses for it. Another reason, though, is fear. Because they figure, well, WikiLeaks is going to get all our data anyway and put it out there, so we might as well let the public have the data. A very important one is cheapness. If you ride the subways in New York City, they have a sign up that says all of our transit apps are WizKid certified. And what do they mean by that? They didn't do it. The people who run the subways let other people use their data stream and monetize it, so there's advertising on it, and they let Google Transit do it, and they can do it better than them. So one good reason to open up the data is you don't have to pay the programmers, you don't have to pay the app developers, you just let it happen. And then there's this whole wonderful, open source is great, data wants to be free, and so on. So there's a lot of pressure, and all over the world this is happening. New York City, Philadelphia, a consortium in Canada of a bunch of cities, Vancouver, Edmonton, Toronto. The EU has a contest that I'll tell you about every year for the best use of open data. India has gone full steam ahead on this. 51 government departments putting out all kinds of data, which is very interesting stuff. And then there are, aside from government systems, there are systems that allow citizens to put data directly out there for other people to share. And I'm going to show you 13 problems. This came up with a baker's dozen, 13 problems that I think are important. So they're down there at the bottom of each of these, but I'll tell you the story. New York City puts out on October 6, 2009, their 103 data sets that they say are the beginning of their data mine, where they're going to make all the data public. Well, the next day there were only 102, because they hadn't thought about one of the data sets. It contained the private email addresses and the secret questions for 1,100 women's organization CEOs in the city. So we now know that the favorite question is, what was your first pet's name? And the answer is Fluffy, Fluffy the cat. So all that confidential information got out there. So the first problem to think about is, if you're going to let the public have the data, make sure you read it first and take out stuff like names and email addresses and phone numbers. That's an easy one. This is the city of Toronto, and I have to teach you a little bit about Canadian postal codes. We have 6-character-long postal codes. So in fact, you probably know that Santa Claus lives in Canada. He lives at the North Pole, and that's Santa's address. Now, why do we care about that? Well, this first string allows you to determine roughly where Santa lives, or anybody else in Canada, and then the rest of it fills in exactly where they are. So it's called a forward sorting area, and then the rest of the postal code. I don't know what the rest is called. Why do I tell you this? Well, this is the municipal complaint reporting from Toronto for a period in December. And as you can see, what they're supposed to do is if somebody makes a complaint, they're supposed to put in the first 3 digits of the postal code. So what happens if you do that, then you've narrowed it down to an area of the city, but you haven't pointed a finger at an individual. But as you can tell, sometimes they do something else. They put in the intersection, which streets. Well, as you can imagine, if you go out there and look on Google Maps or something, there are going to be some streets where that pretty well tells you who made the complaint. Now, why do we care about that? Because people expect this data to be confidential. If they complain about something to the city, and you can tell what they complain about: noise, icy sidewalks, a problem that you don't have here, damaged sidewalks and things like that. So the moral of this story is to be careful about what you call data granularity. So data granularity is how finely you divide your data. If you make it too fine, then you might be pointing the finger at a person. And the whole idea here is you want to make the data available, but you never want somebody to be able to learn details about a particular person. As you'll see in this talk, there's a lot of ways that happens. One of the techniques that we talk about is data jigsawing, where you put together different information. So for example, going back to those reports there, if I went to Logan Avenue and Danforth Avenue in Toronto with Google Maps, I could look and see, is there only one house there, or which house it is. So that's putting data from different databases together. Okay, why do we care? Well, this is a now defunct website. It used to be that if you didn't like your neighbor anywhere, at least in North America, you could just put their address in and say whatever you wanted about them. Like, she's a mean dog lady, or watch your kids around this trailer, things like that. It actually was a website called rottenneighbor.com. And the reason I show it to you is to show you that people will put out information about their neighbors. In fact, I have the map of downtown Calgary. You will recognize, because you lived in Calgary, that we have the river, the Bow River there, and all the red houses are rotten neighbors. The only green house here is on what we call the Calgary Stampede grounds, where we have the Calgary Flames, our hockey team, and so on. So what this proves is that people are kind of inclined to complain about other people and say that they leave their garbage in the lane or something like that. You can even say that somebody is a sex offender, or that their house has been foreclosed on, their mortgage. So this website, luckily, doesn't exist anymore. Okay, it's gone. However, it's been replaced by other ones. This is actually a service that runs in many cities, certainly in North America, called SeeClickFix. So if you go to SeeClickFix.com and put in a city like Calgary, you can either report a problem or you can read about a problem. I want to show you that people will complain about stuff. So here we have 2 different complaints about the same car wash. Obviously, there's somebody who doesn't like the fact that there's a car wash in his neighborhood, and we can kind of track on this system that he's complaining about it. So, people are complainers. Sometimes, though, this information is important. Okay, he was complaining about the icy road. You may remember a few weeks ago, some buildings in Manhattan blew up. Right? It was a gas leak, and somebody might point you to something that's important. So that's kind of the trade-off there. You don't want to ignore this information, or you might have a big hole. In fact, one of the systems, which I think is a pretty good one, coordinates what citizens report. So here it says broken windows, heaters do not work, broken doors, and so on in a building, and then they've attached a photograph. So here it looks again just like some citizen complaining, but then you see down here that there's actually action. So the administrator of the city of Philadelphia, in this case, reads these things and actually does something about it. So that's kind of the answer, to take this data and have somebody who's responsible actually look at it and do something about it. Okay, this is actually a very interesting project. I'm sure you're all familiar with drones, unmanned aerial vehicles. A guy that I know has been flying a drone over Calgary, where I live, looking at homes to see who wastes the most energy. So in other words, with a thermal camera, whose house is giving off the most energy, and based on the color that he puts on this map here, you are shown to be either conserving energy or wasting energy. And that's useful information, and he has the best of intentions. However, there are a number of things that can be deduced from how much energy you use. We have this problem. They're called marijuana grow-ops. So every once in a while, somebody will be growing some plants in their house. They have a whole indoor farm, and there'll be that red house up there. So what happens is, for totally innocent reasons, flying his drone to help people save energy, he is handing the police a map to the grow-ops. And I talked to him about it, and he said, well, I never intended to do that. Yeah, well, you didn't, but that's effectively what happened. So he said, well, it's okay because I have this special provision. If somebody wants to opt out of my system, even though I flew over his house, I can just omit his house and say, this home has been withheld at the owner's request. Well, that is an express map for the police to go there because something is really fishy. And the reason I show you this example is to say that sometimes just omitting somebody's data really doesn't do any good. In fact, it points the finger at them. So there's a lot of subtlety to this. That's why it's such an interesting field. Okay, the Europeans. Here's where we get a little bit of computer science here. They had a contest, and they offered 20,000 euros, which will buy a lot of beer, for the best application of open data. And this was the first one. They had 434 entries from 24 different countries, and the winner was this one from Slovenia. And it is called Zrnaški or whatever, but it means from our taxes. And here's the computer science part of it. What they did is they went out to government databases and looked for names of the CEO of companies, names of lawyers, names of directors, to try to figure out who is getting lots of government contracts. So when the government gives a contract, they always disclose that information. They say, we dealt with the Strabag construction company, and so was their president. So all they really did was put this stuff together, but amazingly, certain friends of the government were getting lots of contracts. Now, you would think, since it's public information, they were doing a great service, and in fact, they won the contest. They then found their backsides in court being sued by someone who said she didn't want to be in this database. Okay, Jarmila Pavazanova of the Strabag Construction Company demanded in court that the value of her contracts be removed from the site. Now, here's the interesting part. How do you remove data when you don't even have the data? All this thing was a re-streaming of data that was in government databases. They were just bringing it together. So they looked at the judge and they said, what do you want us to do? It's not even our data. And the judge said, do it. And this gives us problem number 4. Judges are about 10 years behind the average intelligent person in understanding technology. So when you have lawsuits like this, it's because the judge still remembers his Commodore PET computer or something and thinks that that's what computers are about. The other problem is data can live in many places. So data can be copied, it can be stored, sometimes you don't even know where it lives. So the latest I heard, they have appealed that ruling and they're still in operation, but the real, computer science thing is, how do you take down data you don't even control? I guess you could put a filter in there that somehow hid that data, but that would be a lot of work. Okay, now here's an interesting one from a city in Canada called Edmonton, and they had a mayoral election where this guy named Stephen Mandel did really well. He got most of the votes. So in particular, he got 109,432. The next candidate got 58,000, and some of the lesser candidates got very few votes. Now, why do we care about this? Because when you put data out like this, you have to be careful. You do want the people to know what the election results are. That's important, right? That's public data. However, and here I have to give you a bit of a hypothetical, Here we have a poll. It happens to be the citywide hospital poll. If you happen to be in the hospital on election day, instead of you going to vote, they bring the vote to you. They let you vote from your deathbed or whatever to say who you would want to be mayor. Now, we noticed that Mr. Dave Dowling got 0 votes in the citywide hospital poll. Why do we care? Well, let's say Dave's wife was in hospital. And he comes in and, honey, did you vote? Oh, yeah, I voted. I voted for you, right? I voted for you. Well, she's lying because nobody voted for him in any hospital in Edmonton. Now, this is a contrived example, but it makes the point, I hope, that when you have very small numbers, you don't report them. You just say not significant. It really doesn't matter if Dave got 0 votes or 5 votes. He's not going to be the mayor anyway. So people can make inferences about individuals from small numbers. Okay, I did a really interesting study of campaign finances. So this is when people donate to political candidates. And I learned an awful lot from doing this. First of all, the laws in the United States were written in 1980. And just to remind you, that's what a state-of-the-art computer looked like, the 32K memory in a Commodore PET computer. And you could run VisiCalc and your spreadsheets and stuff like that on that old computer. Back then, of course, data mining meant you put in another cassette tape, right? So the thing actually had a cassette player there that you would put tapes into. So now it's totally changed in a sense. We have tremendous computer power, and Philadelphia put all their campaign finance records up online. And when I first did the study, it said you can view them and print them, but they're not available for download. Well, I downloaded them anyway, and I'll tell you how. First, I said, give me all the candidates whose last name begins with the letter A. And then I did B, and then I did C, and I went through the alphabet 26 times, and I had all of the spreadsheets, and I merged them into one big spreadsheet. So now I own their database. I have their complete contribution database. So it wasn't long until I had some comma-separated files that I could play around with. So the first thing to realize, I made up this word, torturing the data. As you can imagine, when you try to make the data tell you stuff that they didn't want it to tell you, I call that data torturing. So all these controls that are set up here aren't for the data torturer. They're with the general public in mind. Now here's what I found out. First of all, you have to give an address when you make a contribution. A significant number of people in the U.S. have unlisted telephone numbers. They value their privacy. They don't want anybody to know their address or their phone number. In fact, people pay extra to have a phone number that's unlisted. In this case, the Philadelphia government took their last 7 years of contributions and they put them out on the internet in this kind of format. So you had the name, Hab Walid, you had the address, you had the amount. Hab only gave $5, and you had something about where the contribution was made or who it was made to. Now, I was looking through these things, and one of the interesting things you can do with government data is plot it on a map. Why don't you have to plot it on a map here? Philadelphia, River Edge, New Jersey, which is near Philadelphia, Arlington, Massachusetts. Now, wait a minute. Why is somebody from Massachusetts contributing to a local candidate in Philadelphia? Even better, his name is Ronald Rivest. Who's heard of the RSA algorithm? Well, he's the R in the RSA. Rivest Shamir Edelman. And there he is. That's Ron's smiling face. Now, please note it is not illegal for somebody in Massachusetts to give money to another jurisdiction like Philadelphia. It's weird, but it's not illegal. He gave $200 to Stephanie Singer. So an interesting point there is that just by plotting this stuff on a map, you can find things like that. I actually did a little more digging. He also gave to Barack Obama. He gave $2,500 to Obama, and then he gave another $1,000 to Obama. But in pulling that report, I started to learn more about him. There's someone named Gail Rivest, who might well be his wife, and she gave to Obama too, and she's not employed, a school volunteer. But then there's somebody named Alexander, who's an MIT postdoc, who gave to Obama too. So as you start putting all these databases, which are all public, together, you get a pretty good picture of Ronald Rivest and his family, totally without his permission. When I dug a little deeper into this, I got them as comma-separated files, and I want to know, do they really need my address? Well, one answer is simple. The law says you have to provide your name, occupation, and address. Okay, so Joe Smith, carpenter, and here's an address. It doesn't say your home address. But I thought, well, the only reason really to have the address is to find out if there's two John Smiths, maybe they're the same and maybe they're different. So I ran an experiment where I took the three most common names in the United States, surnames, Smith, Johnson, and Williams. I counted a piece of this data. That's how many of each there were. And then using a very generous definition of duplicates, which is, could it possibly confuse me? I went through and I found 8 duplicates in the Smiths, 3 in Johnson, 4 in Williams. So my conclusion is that having the address really didn't do a lot to help you sort out duplicates, but it gave everybody's address away, which is kind of a invasive thing to do. But then it got even better, because while playing with the data, I noticed that 86 of the Smiths, 63 of the Johnsons, and so on, all gave the same address. So I figured this must be like the largest rooming house in the world or something if they all lived there. So I went to Google Maps and took a look at it and did indeed find that it is the office of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. So here's where we start to draw some inferences. Why are all these people giving that address? Well, this is where you go if you're an electrician when you need a job. You go into the hiring hall there and they give you a job. It looks like they also were making it, I'll say at least very convenient to make political donations to the candidate of their choice. So we can start to learn really interesting stuff that would never have come up any other way, and certainly not if they hadn't put that data out there. So one thing I found is that the data was inconsistent. You had to give an address. It doesn't say your home address. You could give 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest, which is the White House. That's an address. It's Barack Obama's address now. Also, policy issues. Somebody decided in 1980 that this data needed to be collected, and nobody's apparently thought about it since then, but so much has changed. We have these new tools like data mapping APIs and big data programs and so on, so it's really time to make the why of why we require it match up with the how of what we can do. Okay, so this is a fellow that I kind of know. He started an airline called WestJet. He got very rich. His name is Clyde Beddoe. I did this little assault on him 6 years ago without his permission, just to see what I could find out about poor old Clyde. Well, that's his picture off a corporate brochure. I looked him up in the telephone directory, which is online, and I've obscured some of the stuff here because his address and home phone number are in the telephone directory. So we have to say he's just a very trusting guy, right? So he puts himself in the phone book. I censor the phone number because it's still his phone number. And he's a pretty important guy. He created a whole airline. Then I went to the address that I got there into the City of Calgary assessment. Again, tax assessment data is always public because you have a right to know. In general, your property tax is based on the value of your house. And if your neighbor's house is identical to yours, the taxes ought to be the same. If your neighbor's house is twice as nice as yours, then the taxes should be double. The reality is there's always a bit of a fight there. So the way it gets sorted out is they make this data public. Now, how did they make this data public? 10 years ago, for 1 month of every year, you could go to a community center and there was a book there, and you could look at that book, but you couldn't take it away. You could make notes, but you couldn't photocopy it. It was like a vicious, sweaty old lady holding on to the book, and she would keep you from taking it away. And back then we didn't have smartphones with cameras, so you couldn't snap a picture of it. But you can make all the notes you want to. Then some genius said, let's put this thing online, and this is, in fact, Clyde Beddoe's house. So again, I obliterated the address, but we see it's assessed at so many dollars. We see how many square feet it has, and so on. That information is everything that the city knows about his house. But they also presented it this way. So there's his house at the red dot, $710,500, and his neighbors have houses that are lower assessment, presumably not as nice, but I don't know. Now, the thing that's interesting about this is, first of all, we can see all this data presented, but also there was an unanticipated consequence, and this is really important in government data. People will try to think of ways to make money. There's a bunch of companies that every year when your tax assessment comes, they drop a card in your mailbox. Do you think your assessment is too high? Pay us $500 and we will go and we will fight it in court for you. Well, now they could send a letter that says, Dear Mr. Clyde Betta, or Dear owner of this address, didn't you know that your assessment is $710,500 and the house next to you is only $634,000 and the one on the other side is $414,000? They have a lot more data to put in that letter, and then they say the same thing, give us $500 and we'll go fight for you. And, the reality is that often they do win. I saw a guy get $1 million shaved off his house assessment in court once. So this freaked out the city. They said, oh no, our data is being misused. So they shut the whole system down. And they asked me what to do about it. I gave them an idea. But what they eventually did is they reopened the system with new safeguards. So this is the answer to how to do it better. The first thing is they put a big honking legal disclaimer here. This license does not give you any right to resale or commercial use of the site. So they can basically take you to court and sue you if you steal their or use their data in ways that it's not intended to. In theory, I guess they could take me to court because one of the uses is not making presentations in Singapore, right? It's only supposed to be there for tax use. The other thing they did was technical. They sorted it out so that if you just want to see the assessment number, you can still do that. But if you want all those other details like the square footage, you have to register, give your name, give your address, and you then have an account with them. They don't charge any money, but they do collect data on you. They also put in a technical restriction, which is a little laughable. From any one IP address, you can only do 20 properties per day. Well, any of my students who couldn't spoof the IP for that, should fail computer science, right? Because it's pretty easy to do. And the other thing is that they didn't think about, sometimes people want to do a whole 20 apartment building. And now it means they can't do it in one day because they can only do 20 in a day, unless they know how to spoof the IP. Okay, a whole different topic, and this is a kind of US-centric one, but a fascinating one. Try very hard not to get arrested, particularly in Florida. Because in the United States, sheriffs are elected officials. They have to go and be re-elected every 4 years or whatever. And of course, the way that they show that they're doing a good job as sheriff is they show you who they arrested. So there we have the mugshots of Robert Jarman Askew for domestic battery. She violated probation and drove with a suspended driver's license, and so on and so on. And the thing to know is that these are people he arrested. We don't know that they're guilty of these things. We just know that he arrested them for that. The other thing is that it stays up there for 30 days. Here's where it gets really creepy. There we have, and I've obliterated the face and the name from this record, a young man whose name was Bobby. He was born in 1997. He was arrested in 2010. I will save you doing the math. He is 12 years and 2 months old, so he is a child. Legally a minor child, and his photo is up on the internet. And he's accused of a burglary of a dwelling. Now, we don't know whether Bobby did it or not. We do know that this is a pretty terrible thing to do to a 12-year-old kid. I took this evidence to the Privacy Commissioner in Canada, who said we would never allow that. We would come down hard on any police officer who did something like this. So we don't do that. But in the U.S., there's a kind of civil right to post stuff, but it is true that this is probably a mistake. They probably shouldn't be posting kids. But now we've got this. There's a whole, anybody seen a mugshot website before? This all started with Bill Gates and Lindsay Lohan and their mugshots being posted, but now just about everybody's mugshot gets posted. And the guy who runs this site is very interesting. He says, well, it's public information, and it's my patriotic duty to make sure that people know who the bad criminals are, so I put their mugshots up. Now that sounds great until you see that anytime between 7 a.m. and 11 p.m. you can call him with your credit card and he will unpublish the photo for $499. So yes, he wants people to know about bad guys, but not so badly that he'll turn down your $499. The weirdest thing I found out about this site is they have another thing where if you really hate somebody, you can give $499 and then the photo never comes down. Usually the photos come down in a month. It's called permanently publishing. So if you really hate somebody, you can do that. And I have no answer to what happens if both requests come in. He probably just takes the money anyway, right? So this is legal. It is gradually being fought by state of Oregon just outlawed it. But the people who are really going to kill this are the credit card companies and Google. How are they going to do that? The credit card companies are going to stop allowing the mugshot people to take credit cards, which will make it very hard for them to take your money. They'll have to use Bitcoin or something like that, and that's pretty dicey. Google's role is that right now, if you get arrested, your mugshot.com hit will probably come up near the top. Google is rejigging their ranking algorithm so it'll drop much lower. So other things that you do, I mean, you could have been an upstanding citizen for 20 years and then you got arrested once, and that's the thing that's going to show up first. So Google's going to fix it so these search results are demoted. Okay, the newest vulnerability that's coming along is your face. There was just a product called NameTag announced. I have a good friend who does a lot of work in facial recognition. He's Alexander Acquisti at Carnegie Mellon. And Alexander's most famous experiment was he took all the people who are on Facebook, young people basically, in Pittsburgh, and then he went to this dating site called Match.com. And when people sign up for a dating site, they usually don't give their name. They make up a pseudonym like Sexy Babe 235 or Hung Guy 404. And you only know them by that name unless they want to meet up with you, in which case you learn their real name. Well, Alexandro ran the two photo databases together, and about 35% of the time he could find out who Sexy Babe 235 is from her Facebook photo, even though it was a different photo. So facial recognition is getting better and better, so much so that there's this app now from nametag.ws where you point your cell phone at somebody, you click it, and it looks them up in various databases. Right now, the only one that they have is the sex offender database, so you'll know if she's a sex offender or not. But in the future, if they had Facebook in there, now that would make it pretty powerful. So what I'm suggesting is that your face is actually becoming quite a vulnerability. Now, speaking of face, I want this, the top got cut off here, but this is actually India that they put a web camera in some government office, and I think it's hilarious. And the reasoning behind it is there's so much bribery there. In fact, there's a website in India called ipaedabribe.com.in where you basically report bribes that you paid, right? Well, the theory here is that if you're handing him money, he's the chief minister of Kerala, if you're handing him money, it'll be caught by somebody on a webcam. Well, there's two things wrong with that. One is that you can walk to the other side of the room where there's no webcam. The other is he probably doesn't care. I have a whole sequence of photographs I captured in Times Square in New York where there's a web camera watching a complete drug deal happen, like, the money, the drugs being handed over. And they obviously either didn't know they were on camera or they didn't care they were on camera. And in fact, if you just remember the word EarthCam, if you go and Google that, you can find cameras all over the world that are pointed at stuff. But this is actually in a government office in India. Okay, data journalism. This is New York City. It's a little hard to see in the back there. And all those red dots up there are people who have pistol permits in Westchester and Rockland County, which are north of New York. But ironically, a few of them actually, although their permit is up there, they live in the Bronx. I used to live right there. So this is a guy who's like down the block from where I used to live when I was growing up. And he is in this public database because he has a permit to carry a gun. And what I did is I obliterated again some of his information, but I ran Spokeo on him. I didn't even pay anything, and I got much more information about him, his approximate age, the value of his property, the fact that he has a post office box, and so on. So what's the point of this? Again, it's data jigsawing. Just using basic information about him, I got all this stuff. I did an even better one with Spokeo on my son, who's 26 years old. I ran his email address through it and called him up and I said, I hear you like such and such a band. He said, how'd did you know that? I said, because you have a playlist. It's on your playlist on last.fm. He said, did you know I had a playlist on last.fm? So it's because of his email address. So he and I now have a non-proliferation treaty that we don't attack each other, because he's a pretty good hacker too, so he can find out things about me. There's a whole new trend to, I'll probably show you the map first, to showing high crime areas. And this is a particular area in the UK where 24 crimes were reported here. Now, the funny thing is, when you look at the picture of the street, it's basically like, I don't know if you guys get Coronation Street, it's basically like a simple, easygoing, British street that's got a pub on it. Apparently the post office workers go and drink there, but it's certainly not a wild and crazy place. But there happens to be a nightclub around the corner, and so all these crimes of antisocial behavior are actually happening in the nightclub, but are being tagged to the postal code of this particular quiet street. Why do we care? Well, these people are complaining that this crime map, official map from the British police, is lowering their property values because people think it's a crime neighborhood, and there are actually reports that say that crime rates and real estate values are strongly correlated. So here we have the government, with the best of intentions, putting out a crime map, but doing it not quite right and causing innocent people's house prices to go down. Okay, there are some indirect risks to government disclosure. One of them is you can't get it back. There's a company in Alpharetta, Georgia called ChoicePoint Systems. It's now part of LexisNexis, and they kind of grab everything. So I interviewed one woman, and she had been to a small claims court, and that was on her file. And she said, yeah, I sued the guy and I won, And she said, but it looked bad because I went to small claims court. And she told Lexis, and they said, well, we don't care. Is it true that you were in court? Well, yeah, but I won. They didn't put that on her file. They just left it in small claims court, for a civil matter. Another guy, even weirder story, was always going for job interviews. He was a really good engineer, and he would get to the final stage of the interview, and then they would hire somebody else. And he was frantic, so he got a friend of his who was a headhunter to pull his file at ChoicePoint. And the friend said, look, you're a convicted murderer. You did 10 years in jail. He said, I did not. That's not me. And they had actually crossed his social security number over with somebody else who was a murderer. And they never told him. Nobody ever told him. That's why he didn't get the job. But nobody wanted to hire a murderer as an engineer. So databases are being cross-referenced, and there's a whole new thing, and I want to kind of leave you with a whole new idea, which is genetic genealogy and how that's going to happen. So have any of you done your family tree on Ancestry? No? Okay, well, it's fun. After you put in your name of your parents and their date of birth, and it goes and it tries to chase your family tree. And I'm not sure, for different countries how good it is, but I know that for the United States where I come from, it's very good. They have 6 billion records and 20 million family trees. But their newest thing is they want your DNA. So if you send them your DNA and $99, they will work your ancestry back to Adam and Eve or whatever. They'll really, carry it back to the beginning. But of course, then they've got your DNA. And you say, well, yeah, but they said they'll be careful. Can my DNA be disclosed without my consent? Generally, no, but there are some limited circumstances required by law to prevent fraud or cybercrime, to enforce our rights. They give about 4 different reasons there why they might give out your DNA. So my advice to you, if you do want to have DNA testing done, doesn't really work with them, send it in the name of your dog or your cat or something like that, right? So your dog will have a DNA profile. One of the implications of DNA in these genome databases is that sperm donors are suddenly getting phone calls from their children saying, I'm going to college, Dad. And the guy goes, you're not my kid. Well, yes, I am. I checked you in the DNA base. There is one plate group, actually, of 27 children in New York City, all of whom have the same sperm donor father. And they go on vacations together, and they all look alike. It's ridiculous, right? There's even a guy who has a truck. He drives around New York. So if you really want to know who your daddy is, you just go and you find his truck, and you go in, give him $299, and he will tell you who's your daddy. And, you can probably see what's coming next. He's starting a reality TV show. So there's going to be a show based upon the interesting stuff that he finds out. So one of the things he's found out, he had a married couple come in. He did their DNA. He said, I don't know how to break this to you, but you both have the same father. Ooh. Okay, problem number 13, the last one. Beware of time-traveling robots from the future. Brad Templeton of the Electronic Frontier Foundation said that a long time ago. There's a book called Wild West 2.0 that says it well. If it happened in the past 10 years, it might be online. If it happened in the past 5 years, it's probably online. If it happened in the past 2 years, it's almost certainly online. So data that used to be public but buried, like divorce judgments that are in a file in the basement of a court, are now being digitized. ChoicePoint actually sends high school students with notebooks to handwrite, because they can't photocopy them, people's divorce judgments to find out who got the car, who got the dog, and so on. So all kinds of data that nobody kind of cared about before is being digitized and sucked up. I like to leave people with this image, which is a true ad that some woman ran. Free to good home, beautiful 6-month-old kitten, playful, friendly, or handsome 32-year-old husband, funny, good job, doesn't like cats, says he goes or the cat goes. Call Jennifer, come and see both and decide which one you'd like. Why do I show you this? So that you'll remember the key point, which is that we have to make choices. So every time we do something, whether it's post something on Facebook or vote for somebody, we're making a choice about what kind of world we want to live in. And the reality is that most people, you now know more than 99.9% of the people about this stuff. I've been shilling my book, and if you haven't picked one up, there's a leaflet from my book, which comes out later this month. If you order it online, they'll give you a pre-publication discount. A lot of the stories that are in here, that I told you here, are fleshed out in a lot more detail in the book. And the book basically concludes that technology is creeping into everything, and we have a responsibility to make sure that it's done right. Nobody wants to throw stuff away. And so if you go for a genetic test and it tells you, that it might save your life, that's a good thing. But if you go for a genetic test and suddenly you can't get medical insurance, that's a bad thing. If you're driving your car and there's a sensor in it that releases your airbag, that's a good thing. But if that sensor also does a breath analysis and calls the police on you, maybe that's not such a good thing. So anyway, there's a picture of the book. That's how you find me. We have a little bit of time for questions between now and booze. Thank you very much. Questions? So who would like to ask a question? Anything. It's hard to get the first question, so we're going to start with the second question, okay? Or you can tell a story. Yes, you're a brave man. Use the mic, though.
What do you teach? What's your course called?
I'm sorry?
What do you teach?
Okay, so I, for a long time, taught computer science. I have two famous students, James Gosling, who invented Java, and Cullen Jennings, who at the age of 28 sold his company to Cisco for $80 million. And so those are my claims to fame. Now what I do is I teach environmental design. So I actually teach about smart communities and kind of whatever I please. But I also have like graduate students working on security. Okay, so I'm a joint professor between computer science and environmental design. That was an easy question. Harder one? Or you just want to drink, that's okay too. Going once? Yes, you. You've been laughing through the whole session. You might as well make me laugh.
Yeah, I don't know how to phrase this. They say there's a very thin line between security and privacy.
Yes.
What do you think is the right balance?
It's going to be personal. And one of the things that's happening is that younger people are like a lot more liberal in their privacy, right? So there's an awful lot of people who go, yeah, it's all on Facebook, that's fine. I have a hunch that they're going to feel a little bit differently. Let's say you are in high school and you're drinking out of the Chem Lab glassware. And then you get into college, and for some reason you didn't get into that Ivy League college, and you never know why. Well, maybe that, photo of you drinking the glassware. So now you go to some horrible college, and you think, well, I'll get a job as a lab tech. And then they show you your picture, and they go, well, we're not going to let you be a lab tech. So one stupid little thing like that can haunt you for a long time. So I met a guy here, actually, I had dinner with him last night, who every year destroys his Facebook profile because he's afraid that some things got in there that he didn't want, and he recreates it under a new name. So I think we're going to start seeing people doing kind of really aggressive things like that, having multiple identities, right? I mean, just like, you should have different emails for different things. So I think we're going to see consumers getting very savvy about ways to fight back. Stores are putting in technology now that follow you. Okay, so you walk into the store and the pings from your smartphone will actually tell the store, kind of who you are, or if you've been there before, and then they have cameras that follow you to see what you pick up and so on. And they're building up all these profiles. There was one case in the U.S. where a guy comes into a Target store, and he says, "This is ridiculous. You sent my daughter ads for baby stuff, and she's only 16 years old." And the headline of this article, by the way, was, "Target finds out girl is pregnant before her father does." And here's how it worked. She went in there, and there's certain products that women buy when they're pregnant, skin moisturizer and stuff. She bought that stuff, didn't even use a credit card, used a debit card, but Target was tracking her. Target then started to send her these ads. And the father freaked out, went in, and 2 weeks later came back and apologized and said, "Oh, there were some things going on in my house I didn't know about. She is pregnant. She's due in August." So Target, and this is where it gets really interesting, Target said, "Oh, yeah, right. It's creepy to send women ads that are for baby stuff. And they probably won't use those coupons because we creep them out." So now what they do is they mix in lawnmowers and barbecues and other things. So they're still targeting the woman with baby stuff, but she looks at it, she goes, "Lawnmower, I don't want that." But look, there's the baby coupon. And the money quote from the guy at Target was, "As long as she doesn't realize that we're doing that to her, then it's not creepy," right? So they just find more and more sophisticated ways to target you. And they will. Yes, I'm back. Thank you.
I have a question. So as more governments right now are putting more data online, we look at things like City of New York. They've also been looking at, you've got this huge population that can start to enrich back that data. And so I think one of the questions we're looking at from a privacy standpoint is, as people can upload data and start to enrich that government data, are you seeing cases where malicious actors are coming in and starting to maybe taint your reputation by uploading things that aren't true about you back into the public
Yeah,
sources?
well, the C-Click fix and the there's a site called dirtyphonebook.com where you can put any 10-digit phone number in and say whatever you want about it, and it's always full of comments about people. So yeah, I think there are complaints getting into the system. The one that I heard about that's very specific is a bunch of neighbors in Red Deer, Alberta, hated this one neighbor, and they started making bogus complaints on C-Click Fix. So the bylaw officer was always there, "Oh, your garbage is blowing in the back lane." But the bylaw officer never found any garbage because they were all just bogus things. So when you have these systems that, as you suggested, allow citizen input, that's when you get into a lot of trouble. So yeah, it is a real problem. Okay, I think it's time for a drink. Thank you all very much. Was there a question? No, come back. You almost lost. Go ahead.
Yeah, last question. Have you done any analysis of less democratic, open societies? So all your examples are from primarily the U.S. Have you looked at other countries?
I'll give you one Chinese example, because I have a whole, the book is not just about computers. There's a whole biology and DNA section. AIDS testing by the World Health Organization is supposed to be anonymous, but Guangxi SAR in China has just passed a law that you must disclose your status, to your spouse and others. So there are countries out there that have different ideas about information, I guess is the best way to put it. Okay, thanks, bye. Thank you. Thanks for saving it.